When you stop contacting a man, something powerful happens, and it's not magic, it's human nature. See, when you are always available, always calling, always checking in, you remove the space a man needs to feel your value. People don't miss what they always have access to. The moment you step back, you're no longer predictable, and that's when the truth starts to rise to the surface. When you stop contacting a man, silence immediately changes the power dynamic, and most people don't realize how deeply that silence works on the human mind. When communication is constant, it becomes background noise. It blends into routine. A man can start taking your presence for granted without ever meaning to, simply because it's always there. Your messages, your calls, your availability become expected instead of appreciated. But the moment you stop reaching out, the routine breaks, and that break forces him to notice what he had been overlooking. Silence creates space, and space creates thought. When you are no longer filling every gap with words, he has time to think. He starts replaying interactions, remembering how often you checked in, how much emotional support you gave, how you made his life easier just by being present. This is self-reflection, and it doesn't happen when someone is being constantly entertained or reassured. Silence removes distraction and leaves him alone with his own thoughts, and that's where awareness begins. At first, that awareness can feel uncomfortable. He may feel restless without fully understanding why. He checks his phone not because he expects a message, but because something feels off. Your absence stands out more than your presence ever did. That's the power of silence. It highlights value by removing access. Suddenly, he realizes that attention is not automatic, that connection is not guaranteed, and that effort matters. This shift also flips emotional control. When you were always initiating, he had the luxury of responding when convenient. Silence takes that luxury away. Now he has to decide whether he cares enough to act. This is not manipulation, it's reality. Life works this way with everything of value. When something becomes limited, its importance becomes clear. Silence doesn't beg, explain, or demand. It simply observes. What's important to understand is that silence doesn't create feelings that weren't already there. It reveals them. If he values you, the silence will push him to reflect on his behavior and his priorities. He'll question whether he's been showing up properly or just coasting. If he doesn't value you, the silence won't bother him for long, and that clarity is just as powerful. Either way, you gain information instead of confusion. Silence also restores your inner balance. When you stop contacting him, you stop seeking validation from outside yourself. You give your mind space to breathe, to refocus, and to remember that your worth is not measured by someone else's response time. That self-respect subtly shifts how others perceive you as well. People can sense when someone is grounded versus when they are chasing reassurance. In that quiet space, you reclaim control over your emotions and your energy. You're no longer reacting, you're observing. And observation is where wisdom comes from. Silence allows you to see patterns clearly, without excuses, without noise. It lets truth surface naturally. When words stop, behavior speaks. And behavior never lies. When you stop contacting a man, distance begins to work in a way that constant communication never can. Distance creates curiosity, and curiosity is powerful because it pulls attention inward. When you are always present, there is no mystery, no pause for the mind to wander. Everything is known, expected, and familiar. But the moment you step back, his mind fills the empty space with questions. Why does she go? Why is she quiet? What changed? These questions don't come from manipulation. They come from a sudden break in pattern, and the human brain always seeks to understand a broken pattern. Curiosity forces emotional awareness. A man who hasn't had to examine his feelings suddenly has to sit with them. He starts noticing small things he didn't pay attention to before, like how often you listen without judging, how you brought calm or excitement into his life, how your presence added comfort. These realizations usually arrive quietly, often when he's alone. Distance removes the noise and highlights the emotional impact you had simply by being there. This curiosity can also trigger a sense of uncertainty, and uncertainty challenges comfort. Comfort allows people to stay passive. When everything feels secure, there's no urgency to act. Distance removes that comfort. Now there's a question mark where certainty used to be. And when certainty disappears, intention starts to reveal itself. A man who cares will not be able to sit comfortably in that uncertainty for long. His curiosity will push him toward action, toward reaching out, clarity. Distance also shifts focus from you to him. When you stop contacting him, you stop managing the connection for both of you. You stop reminding him of your presence, your value, and your role in his life. That responsibility quietly moves to him. He now has to decide whether the connection matters enough to maintain on his own. This is where emotional awareness deepens. He can no longer rely on your effort to keep the bond alive. At the same time, distance strengthens your own clarity. Without constant interaction, you begin to see the situation more honestly. You notice whether he reaches out with purpose or stays silent without concern. Distance gives you perspective. It reduces emotional fog and allows you to observe instead of react. You begin to understand that real interest doesn't need to be chased or forced. It shows up naturally when space is created. Curiosity also works differently depending on his level of maturity. A mature man uses distance as a moment of reflection. He asks himself what he wants, what he's willing to offer, and whether he's been fair. An immature man avoids these questions and distracts himself instead. That contrast becomes clear only when distance exists. Without distance, both can appear similar on the surface. What makes distance so powerful is that it doesn't argue or explain. It simply exists, and in that existence, truth surfaces. Curiosity leads to awareness, awareness leads to choice, and choice reveals intention. When you step back, you allow his actions to answer questions that words never could. When you stop contacting a man, the moment of truth arrives, because this is where behavior replaces promises and intentions replace words. With the comfort removed, he is faced with a choice he can no longer avoid. He either steps up with clarity or he pulls away with excuses. There is no middle ground here, even if it looks that way on the surface. What seems like confusion is often just avoidance dressed up as uncertainty. A man who is serious does not stay vague for long. When he feels the distance, he feels the risk of losing you, and that feeling pushes him toward action. He reaches out not just to talk, but to understand. His communication becomes more direct. He asks where he stands. He makes plans instead of suggestions. He shows consistency instead of random check-ins. Clarity shows up in his tone, his timing, and his effort. He doesn't need you to guide him because his interest guides him naturally. On the other hand, a man who is never fully invested reacts very differently. Instead of moving forward, he stalls. He sends mixed signals. He appears briefly and disappears again. He talks about being busy, overwhelmed, unsure, needing time, but nothing actually changes. These excuses are not accidental. They are a way to keep access without responsibility. He wants the option of you without the obligation of showing up fully. What's important is that excuses only exist when someone wants to avoid a decision. Clarity requires courage. It requires honesty, and not everyone is ready for that. When you stop contacting him, you remove the safety net that allowed him to stay undecided. Now he has to face the reality of his own intentions, and not everyone likes what that reflection shows them. This is also where many people get tempted to break their silence. The moment you feel him pulling away, the urge to explain, reassure, or chase can feel strong, but doing that only delays the truth. Silence allows the process to complete itself. It allows him to fully reveal whether he is capable of stepping up without being pushed. Stepping up doesn't mean grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It means consistency. It means effort that doesn't fade after a day or two. It means actions that match words. Pulling away, on the other hand, often looks subtle. It looks like delays, unanswered messages, and conversations that go nowhere. But subtle doesn't mean insignificant. Those small behaviors tell a very big story. Powerful part of this moment is not what he does, but what you learn. You stop guessing. You stop analyzing text and tone. You stop hoping someone will change. Instead, you see reality clearly. A man who wants you makes room for you. A man who doesn't make excuses for why he can't. By stepping back, you don't force an outcome, you reveal one. You give him the space to choose, and you give yourself the clarity to accept that choice without resentment or regret. When someone shows you who they are through their actions, believe them the first time. When you stop contacting a man, something deeper than emotion starts to happen. Respect comes into focus. Respect is not built by over-explaining, over-giving, or overextending yourself. Respect is built when boundaries are clear and firm. The moment you stop reaching out, you are silently communicating that your time and energy matter. You are no longer available on demand, and that shift alone changes how you are perceived. Many people confuse constant effort with love, but real respect doesn't grow from availability, it grows from value. When a man knows you will always be there no matter how little he gives, the relationship becomes unbalanced. Not because he is bad, because human nature adapts to whatever it's allowed to receive. When you stop contacting him, that imbalance becomes visible. He now has to recognize that access to you is not guaranteed. Boundaries force accountability. Without boundaries, there is no urgency to grow, no pressure to improve behavior. When you step back, he has to ask himself whether he has been showing up with the same energy he's been receiving. That question alone separates maturity from immaturity. A man who respects you will reflect, adjust, and rise to the level required. A man who doesn't will resist, withdraw, or dismiss the change altogether. Respect also changes how communication feels. When you stop chasing conversations, every interaction becomes more intentional. Words carry more weight because they are no longer frequent or forced. Silence makes communication meaningful again. Instead of endless talking that leads nowhere, what is said now actually matters. This is where emotional maturity shows. Respect is not loud, it is consistent. Another powerful shift happens within you. When you enforce boundaries, your self-respect grows. You stop questioning your worth based on someone else's attention. You stop measuring yourself by how quickly someone responds or how often they reach out. That inner stability is felt even if it's never spoken. Confidence rooted in self. Respect doesn't need validation, and that kind of confidence naturally commands respect from others. A man can sense when someone values themselves. It shows in posture, tone, patience, and decision-making. When you stop contacting him, you are no longer operating from fear of loss. You are operating from self-worth. That alone changes the dynamic. You are no longer asking to be chosen. You are observing whether he is capable of choosing you properly. Respect also reveals priorities. When effort is required, people show what truly matters to them. If he steps up, it's because he recognizes your value and respects your boundary. If he doesn't, it's not because you asked for too much. It's because he was never willing to give more. Boundaries don't push the right people away. They filter out the wrong ones. In the quiet space created by distance, respect either grows or disappears. And that outcome is a gift because it saves you from investing in something that was never balanced to begin with. When you stop contacting a man, you're not testing him, you're honoring yourself, and respect always follows self-respect. whether from him or from the clarity you gain moving forward. When you stop contacting a man, your absence becomes the mirror that reflects his true level of investment. Words can be rehearsed, promises can sound convincing, and emotions can be spoken beautifully, but investment is always revealed through action, especially when effort is no longer being handed to him. When you remove yourself from the equation, you stop carrying the connection on your shoulders, and whatever remains is the truth. A man who is genuinely invested doesn't need to be reminded of your value. When you disappear from his daily routine, he feels the gap immediately. Not just emotionally, but practically. He notices the lack of support, the lack of attention, the lack of presence that quietly made his life lighter. Your absence disrupts his comfort, and that disruption pushes him to respond. Investment shows up as consistency, not urgency. He doesn't just check in once to test the waters. He stays present. He follows through. He shows effort that doesn't fade after reassurance. On the other hand, a man who was only casually involved reacts differently. Your absence doesn't inspire action, it creates distance. Not because he's hurt, but because he was never deeply connected in the first place. He may resurface occasionally, sending short messages or vague signals, just enough to keep a door open. That's not investment, that's convenience. He misses the attention, not the connection, and your silence exposes that difference clearly. Absence removes emotional confusion. When you're constantly communicating, it's easy to mistake familiarity for commitment. But when you step back, you see who makes the effort without being prompted. Investment doesn't need reminders. It shows up because it wants to, not because it's afraid to lose access. A man who values you doesn't wait for perfect timing. He creates it. What's powerful about absence is that it doesn't argue or demand. It simply allows behavior to surface naturally. There's no pressure, no ultimatums, no explanations, just space, and in that space intentions become visible. If he reaches out with clarity and consistency, that's investment. If he fades, hesitates, or keeps things casual, that's also an answer. Absence also teaches you to detach from potential and focus on reality. You stop asking what he could become and start seeing who he actually is. Investment isn't about future promises, it's about present action. When you're no longer available, you learn whether he's willing to step into responsibility or retreat into comfort. At the same time, your own mindset shifts. You stop tying your worth to his response. You begin to understand that someone's lack of effort is not a reflection of your value, but of their capacity. That realization brings peace. You no longer chase clarity because clarity has already shown itself. Your absence becomes a filter. It doesn't punish, it reveals. It separates interest from intention, attention from effort, and words from commitment. And once you see that clearly, you're no longer guessing, hoping, waiting. You're choosing based on truth, and that's where your real power lies. When you stop contacting a man, something important happens inside you before it happens in him. You reclaim yourself. You stop pouring energy outward and start pulling it back home. A long time, your attention may have been focused on whether he cares, whether he'll respond, whether he'll choose you. But the moment you step back, the focus shifts. It's no longer about chasing answers from him. It's about listening to what his behavior is already saying. Your absence creates a pause, and in that pause, you regain emotional control. You're no longer reacting to every message or silence. You're no longer adjusting your mood based on his attention. That's power. Real power isn't loud, it's calm. It's the ability to sit still and not rush to fill empty space. When you stop contacting him, you show that you are complete with or without his validation. This shift is deeply felt. A man can sense when a woman is no longer emotionally dependent on his responses. Your tone changes, your energy changes, even your patience changes. You're no longer waiting to be chosen, You're watching to see if he's capable of choosing you the right way. That subtle difference transforms the entire dynamic. Your absence also removes pressure from words and places it fully on action. There are no long conversations to explain how you feel, no emotional speeches, no reminders of what you deserve. Silence does the work for you. It allows his actions to speak clearly without interpretation. If he values you, he will move. If he doesn't, he won't. And either way, you get the truth without having to beg for it. Choosing yourself doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough to stop settling for uncertainty. It means you respect your time, your emotions, and your future. When you stop contacting him, you are no longer available for half effort or emotional confusion. You are setting a standard not through demands, but through behavior. This is where many people grow uncomfortable, because choosing yourself can feel like loss at first. Silence can feel lonely before it feels empowering. But that discomfort is